On the night of September 15, 2016, the peace of Seattle was shattered by a gruesome crime. Jacob Miller, a young businessman, was found dead in the house where he was preparing for his wedding. But the most horrifying thing was that the killer was his twin brother, whom Jacob trusted the most. The case revealed dark secrets in the relationship between the two brothers, making everyone wonder what turned love into destruction. Jacob and Brandon Miller grew up in a strict suburban Seattle home. Their parents, who believed in the value of family and unity, taught Jacob and Brandon that the love between siblings was the most important thing and that nothing could break that bond. Their father, a strict educator, always required his children to be upright, disciplined, and never let personal feelings affect the family's career and honor. The two brothers, despite their differences in personality, were strangely close. Jacob, outgoing, energetic, and confident, often took the lead in social activities, while Brandon, quiet and introverted, found security in his older brother's presence. They did everything together, studying, playing sports, even entering the business world together. Their harmony was something their parents were proud of, a symbol of a brotherly bond that no one could break. But their lives changed forever in the winter of 2003. During a weekend trip, their parents' car skidded on an icy road and plunged into a ravine. Both died instantly, leaving Jacob and Brandon, then 15, in an indescribable state of grief. The sudden loss of their parents plunged the brothers into a state of crisis, but it also deepened their love for each other. Without their parents to rely on, they could only rely on each other to get by. Brandon, who was already introverted, became even more dependent on Jacob after the death of his parents. Not only did he seek comfort from his older brother, but he also felt that Jacob was the only person left in the world he could trust. Jacob, realizing his role as the sole breadwinner in the remaining family, did his best to care for and protect Brandon. From then on, the relationship between the two brothers became inseparable, as if they were two halves of a single entity. As adults, Jacob and Brandon Miller both became successful businessmen. Jacob, with his outgoing and dynamic personality, quickly rose through the ranks of a financial consulting firm and then founded his own investment firm in 2012, achieving great success. Meanwhile, Brandon, with his quiet and introverted personality, worked in the technology industry, where he was in charge of product development and project management, and was highly regarded for his problem-solving and creativity. Despite pursuing different career paths, Jacob and Brandon maintain a close relationship, often sharing and supporting each other in their work. However, behind the facade of success lies an increasingly troubled relationship. The close bond between the brothers gradually transforms into a complex and dangerous love. After the sudden death of their parents, they become each other's sole support, with no one else to turn to. This loss strengthens the bond between Jacob and Brandon, but it also lays the foundation for a relationship that goes beyond mere sibling love. At first, these changes were just vague and difficult to explain feelings. Jacob found himself wanting Brandon to be closer to him, not just emotionally but also physically. Every time they sat together on the sofa, when their bodies accidentally touched, Jacob felt an irresistible urge, a feeling both strange and intense. The light touches, the seemingly harmless hugs, began to take on a deeper meaning. Brandon was not immune to this change either. He felt confused when he realized that he craved closeness with Jacob in an inexplicable way. Every night, when they lay next to each other on trips, Brandon could not help but want to feel Jacob's warmth, not just as a brother, but as a lover. Brandon's sensitivity made it easy for him to notice the small changes in the way Jacob looked at him, the way Jacob unconsciously held him closer every time they were together. Long trips together have become places where long repressed emotions gradually reveal themselves, transforming into actions that go beyond normal boundaries. During a trip to a secluded resort, completely separated from the supervision of society, Jacob and Brandon begin to allow themselves to loosen their moral barriers. The long nights pass in quiet silence. Both of them begin to allow accidental touches to become intentional, Seemingly comforting hugs gradually turn into passionate gestures. The first kiss is not out of pure love, but out of desire, a desire that is suppressed and finally released in a space that no longer has limits. They cross all taboo boundaries, immersed in a sick relationship that both are aware of, but cannot retreat from. The longer the nights together, the more clearly the distortion in this relationship is revealed. Brandon, consumed by desire and obsession, becomes increasingly paranoid, fearful of losing Jacob, whom he considers his only lifeline. His insane jealousy grows, pushing Brandon into a bottomless pit, where he is determined to keep Jacob by his side at all costs, even if it means destroying everything. The relationship between Jacob and Brandon has spiraled out of control, from intimacy and love to something dangerously pathological. They are caught in a spiral of twisted emotions, where love is suffocated by fear, jealousy, and clinginess. The days that follow become a nightmare as they both find themselves on a path to destruction. Jacob, once the epitome of confidence and determination, begins to feel suffocated in an unhealthy relationship. With each passing day, the suffocation grows, and Jacob knows that if they don't break free from this spiral, they will both be drawn into an inevitable tragic end. Jacob Miller, after years of being in a complicated and dangerous relationship with his twin brother Brandon, gradually realizes that their love has become uncontrollably toxic. The bond that once brought Jacob comfort and deep connection had become a burden, a mental trap that left him feeling trapped. The intense emotions and intimacy he had once indulged in had turned into chains, binding him to a relationship that was no longer healthy. Jacob realized that if he didn't act, both he and Brandon would continue to spiral into chaos with no way out. Feeling suffocated by Brandon's overdependence gradually made Jacob feel suffocated. Instead of feeling happy when he was with Brandon, he began to see his own loss, the loss of freedom, the loss of the right to decide his own life. Brandon's love for Jacob now felt like an invisible chain, trapping him in a toxic relationship where each closeness only added to the heaviness in his mind. Jacob's thoughts of escaping the relationship became more and more obsessive. He gradually avoided intimate moments with Brandon, trying to create distance by immersing himself in work. Every day, Jacob sought escape in social activities, hoping that contact with the outside world would help him regain his lost balance. He began to go out more often, attend events, meet new people, hoping that through these new relationships he could find a way out of the vicious cycle that his relationship with Brandon had become. At a fancy party in downtown Seattle in early August 2016, Jacob met Sarah Dawson, a young, passionate journalist. Sarah was unlike any other woman Jacob had ever known. She was independent, intelligent, and full of life. From the moment they first met, Jacob was drawn to Sarah's natural charisma and positive energy. Not only was she a standout beauty, but she was also the first person in a long time who made Jacob feel heard and understood something he had been missing in his relationship with Brandon. Sarah appeared as a glimmer of light in Jacob's life, giving him hope for a new life where he could be himself without being bound by the past and the distorted emotions that had plagued him for so many years. With each encounter with Sarah, from intimate conversations over warm cups of coffee to lavish dinners at fancy restaurants, Jacob seemed to come alive, freed from the shadow of his binding relationship with Brandon. With Sarah, he began to feel a true happiness, a feeling he had almost forgotten during the years of being shackled by the past. But the new light in Jacob's life could not escape Brandon's scrutiny. He noticed every little change in his brother's behavior. Their closeness became less and less frequent, and when they did, it became awkward and cold. Brandon began to panic at this distance, feeling like he was losing the only person he could rely on, the only person he loved absolutely. Jacob's estrangement not only hurt Brandon deeply, but also awakened a terrible fear in him, the fear of being abandoned, of being left out of Jacob's life. Brandon's simmering jealousy soon exploded into an uncontrollable rage. When he discovered Sarah's presence in Jacob's life, Brandon began to stalk his brother. He felt threatened by this woman, as if Sarah were stealing away the person Brandon had always held close to him. Every time he saw Jacob laughing and joking with Sarah, a sharp knife stabbed Brandon's heart, reminding him of the impending loss. Brandon's jealousy became more than just an unpleasant feeling. It turned into a silent rage, a storm that threatened to destroy everything Jacob had worked so hard to build. The conflict between the two brothers is no longer just a simmering tension, but quickly explodes into a dramatic confrontation. Brandon, in a fit of jealous rage, cannot accept that Jacob is gradually moving away from him. Brandon's possessiveness becomes so obsessive that he begins to take increasingly extreme actions to keep Jacob by his side. From threatening to harm himself to controlling every aspect of Jacob's life, Brandon is like a spring that has been compressed for too long. Each time he feels he is losing control, he bursts, becoming more dangerous than ever. But what Jacob does not expect is the dark and dangerous level that Brandon's jealousy and obsession have reached. Love, which has already turned into a sick feeling, has now turned into a crazy obsession. Brandon is willing to do anything to keep Jacob by his side, no longer caring about the consequences. For Brandon, keeping Jacob close has become a life or death mission, something he is willing to sacrifice at any cost, even if it means destroying himself and the people he loves. Jacob Miller, after months of internal struggle and profound changes in himself, finally realizes that his feelings for Sarah Dawson are more than just a passing infatuation. They are true love and emotion he has never experienced before, not even in his complicated relationship with his twin brother Brandon. Sarah brings him peace, joy, and a sense of freedom that he has long craved. In her arms, Jacob feels like he can be his true self, unfettered by the obsessions and tensions that have plagued him all this time. Jacob and Sarah's relationship deepened. They spent more time together, shared their plans for the future, and in those moments, Jacob began to imagine a new life, one without inhibitions, without secrets and lies. These feelings pushed Jacob to make a crucial decision. He realized that he could no longer continue living a suffocating life with Brandon, that he could no longer maintain a secret and dangerous relationship. Jacob longed to be freed from that bondage and build a new life with Sarah, a life with a real family, with a wife who loved him sincerely and asked nothing more than for his loyalty. On a romantic evening by the beach, under a brilliant sunset, Jacob decided to propose to Sarah. He had prepared carefully for this moment, from choosing an exquisite ring to choosing a special location where they had shared some of the most beautiful memories of their relationship. As he knelt before Sarah, the ring sparkling in his hand, Jacob felt a surge of relief and happiness. This was the decision he knew he had to make, a bold step away from the past and into a new future. Brandon's hysteria becomes more and more evident. Feelings of betrayal, abandonment, and extreme jealousy drive Brandon out of control. He cannot bear the thought of Jacob devoting his life to Sarah, leaving him behind. Brandon's possessiveness has crossed all limits, and in his psychological turmoil, he begins to seek ways to prevent Jacob's marriage at all costs. A confrontation between the two brothers becomes inevitable. Jacob, aware that Brandon is becoming more dangerous than ever, tries to keep his cool and explains to Brandon that his life has changed, that he needs to move on. But to Brandon, it is nothing more than an accusation, a rejection that he cannot accept. Brandon, in his despair and pain, decides that if he cannot keep Jacob, then no one else can either. Brandon's plan slowly took shape in the chaos of his mind, and hatred clouded his reason. He believed that if he couldn't have Jacob for himself, he would destroy everything, including his own life, just so that no one else could touch Jacob again. Once again, love turned into possession, and obsession drove Brandon to the brink of an unforgivable act, an act that would forever change both of their lives. Since the day Jacob decided to propose to Sarah, everything in his life seemed to be lit up with happiness and hope. He eagerly prepared for the wedding, a turning point that he believed would lead him out of the darkness of the past and open a bright new chapter in his life. But behind that happiness was a shadow that was constantly following him. Brandon, his twin brother, was slowly falling into a state of chaos and despair. A week before the wedding, Jacob and Sarah held a small party with their closest friends to celebrate the upcoming event. Brandon, being a twin, was also invited, but his mind was filled with evil thoughts. He stood in the shadows, watching Jacob and Sarah exchange loving smiles and glances. The scene was like a knife stabbing Brandon's heart, adding to the jealousy and hatred that had been building up for so long. Brandon could not bear it any longer. He quietly left the party, his mind now completely dominated by the plan he had been hatching for the past few days. He decided that if he could not have Jacob, then he would make them both pay. Jacob would never find the happiness he sought, and Sarah, who had taken Jacob away from him, would suffer the same fate. The night before the wedding, when everyone was asleep, Brandon snuck into Jacob's house. He was familiar with every corner of this house, where they had grown up, shared happy and sad memories. But tonight, those memories no longer mattered. In Brandon's hand was a large knife, the sharp blade reflecting the dim light from the streetlight outside. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous, a ruthless determination, a terrifying certainty. Brandon entered Jacob's bedroom, where his brother was sleeping soundly, unaware that his worst nightmare was approaching. Standing beside the bed, Brandon looked down at the person he once loved and was most attached to. But now, that love had been replaced by a sickening possessiveness, a pain and jealousy that had turned into hatred. Without hesitation, Brandon raised the knife, and with all his rage, he stabbed Jacob straight in the chest. Jacob woke up in pain and panic, but before he could realize what was happening, Brandon stabbed him several more times. Blood poured from the wounds, staining the pristine white bed, a symbol of the happiness Jacob was about to achieve. Jacob's strength was quickly exhausted under Brandon's fierce attacks, and finally he could not resist any longer. Seeing that Jacob was still breathing weakly, Brandon decided to end everything quickly and decisively. He drove the knife deep into Jacob's throat, making sure there was no chance of survival. Blood poured out, coating Brandon's hands, but he felt no fear or remorse, just a cold emptiness. After completing his cruel act, Brandon stood silently looking at Jacob's body. All he felt was an indescribable void. The love, jealousy, and hatred had now turned into absolute emptiness. He knew that there was no turning back, that his actions had destroyed everything. Brandon quietly left the house, washed the knife, and put it back where it was, as if nothing had happened. Then he walked out, leaving behind a house that was immersed in deathly silence. The next morning, Sarah, the woman Jacob was about to marry, felt anxious when she couldn't contact him. She went to Jacob's house with a growing sense of unease. When she opened the door and found Jacob's body, everything around her collapsed. Sarah screamed in horror, calling the police in indescribable shock. When the police arrived at the scene, they quickly sealed off the area and began investigating. Traces from fingerprints to DNA quickly led them to Brandon, who had put up no resistance when he was arrested. During questioning, Brandon confessed to the full extent of his crimes. Obsession and jealousy had driven him to this cruel decision. If he couldn't have Jacob, no one else could. The trial took place in late 2016, and Brandon was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case ended in unspeakable tragedy, but its echoes live on as a warning about the destructive power of love when it turns to obsession and hatred.